Hello everybody, hope you guys are doing well. So continuing on our journey in React, today we would start a little bit about what JSX is. So we have already studied about JSX, right? We'll start about passing data, and then we'll see some more functionalities. But before that, let's see something more about React, and then we'll try to understand the different aspects, how data has been passed or how data passing works around, and then we'll go on from there. So uh, yeah, just it is my okay. Yeah, just let me check if the stream is up and running, right? Okay. Okay, so basically now we studied about JSX, right? So we studied about how to write JSX, and then we also studied a little bit more about how why to use JSX versus create React versus React dot create element. Then we studied how so ultimately everything is going to be converted to do this, right? React dot create element. Now how JX does this? There is something called as Babel, that is a transpiler, right? So transpiler job is basically to convert this JSX into uh, React dot create element, and then to add it to the DOM, to the virtual DOM as well. That is all taken care by Babel. So we also studied some rules, right, to write JSX, because so first we studied rules for writing JSX, right? We said, so then we understood what JSX is. So JSX is nothing but HTML like syntax, or HTML like syntax markup. It's almost similar to HTML. The only thing, it's JavaScript objects. Now then we said, now the moment so JSX is always in, like, starting will be always a small letter. Then we said that when we are returning, okay, then we said that only a single parent, so JSX has this very unique property of single parent return, right? And then we said anything inside curly braces will be treated as JS code, and it will run as JS code. Now then we said having components or componentization is a major feature of React, right? So we'll be having different components. Now these components will be written in different files, right? So Webpack is basically going to package this together and make it easier for us while we are on development, like when we are trying to run, so, or when we are trying to be in a live running environment. This is when this package uh, like module bundling is going to play an important role. Then we said that components are written in capital, right? So they are written in capital letters. Then we also said that if you want to pass it a if I'm passing a class name, then we are basically a class name will be written in capital letters. So class, so in normal CSS we had class, right? So now in JSX we are going to have something called as class name that is being written. So it is this class name that is going to work. Okay, then for the fourth point we said um uh yeah, I haven't talked about event handling, so that's another one. And okay, so JSX can be written in two ways. One, so JSX components are made in two ways. Basically you can make it using let's have it this way. So JSX component can be of two ways. So one, you can write using arrow functions. So one is basically using arrow, and then other is basically using the function keyword, right? So you can have two types of JSX component. Now so now our goal is basically to understand how to pass data, right? So now we need to understand more about data parsing, how data is passed. So we need to understand about data parsing. For the first thing, so now React by default has only one way data binding, right? So by default, React has only one way data binding. Now that means if I need to pass it down the hierarchy, okay, then we can pass it. Then we'll have to pass. So if I have a hierarchy, say I have a parent, and then I have another. So this is a, like, if I have an hierarchy like structure. Okay, for example, on top I have one parent. Okay, this is a parent. Then this parent has siblings, right? So it has different siblings, right? So this is sibling 1. Then I have sibling 2, and so on, right? Now if I need to, and then if this further has some sibling, like if this further, oh no, this is child 1 and child 2, not sibling. So this is child 1 and then child 2. So and if this further has say child 1 dash and let's say child 1 double dash. So now what is going to happen is, now data can be only passed in one way. That means by that what I mean to say is it will only flow from the parent to the innermost child. You cannot do this way propagation. This is not allowed in React. Now it is how the reason is this is how React has been developed. It does not allow two-way data binding. So it is only having one way, that is from parent to child, and that is basically how data binding is going to work. Now if you look at it further, now data binding can further be classified as two things, right? So now how are we going to do is data binding is what we are looking. So data binding can be done in two ways. So either you make use of props, or either you make use of state. So both of them are going to enable data binding. Now we'll see what are the drawback and which should be used when, and what is the advantage of using one over the other. We'll see that. Before that, we also studied that suppose if we don't have any parent element, then we can do something called as because React will need a parent element, so we can do something called as React dot fragment. The shorthand for this is basically using opening and close. Now um, there is a there is a slight difference between when we use React dot create element and when we do this. Now both ultimately won't be present in the DOM, like in the DOM, in the virtual DOM that we are talking about. Both of them will not be present. So, but then there is slight difference between when to use React dot fragment and when to use. This is a very slight point. Um, yeah. So now in React dot fragment, you can add something called as keys, right? Keys are basically nothing but unique identification, right, for similar items. But then you can't add keys when we use this. So this will not take in keys. Uh, we can say this will not take in keys. Okay, now let's go and say a little bit more. Uh, uh, okay, now why we need is this key is basically so one of the major features of this key is basically to uniquely identify only that element which has changed, right? For example, if I have an unordered list and then in that I have many list items, right? So this is list items. Now there should be okay. Now these are okay. I don't. I guess I'm putting the wrong way, but okay. Suppose if we have okay list items, right? So now there should be some unique identification, right? There should be some mechanism by which we should be able to uniquely identify this. Like we should be able to uniquely identify. Now, what if only the data in this item is changing? Then why should we re-render this, right? Why should this undergo re-rendering? So that is not a very good process, right? Why should this undergo re-rendering? We should only re-render that part of the data that is undergoing some change, right? So if this is not undergoing any change, then there is no need for us to have that being redundant, right? No change. So basically what we are saying is if there is no change, then we should have no re-rendering as well, because we are going to waste time, right? So there should be some way we should be able to optimize the performance, right? Okay, now yeah, so now let's come back to where we were with props and state, right? So now we said that data binding can be done in two ways. So we said it's good to revise because ultimately we will be using these concepts here. So we said okay. So we said data binding can be done in two ways, right? Either it could be using either it could have something called as prop, or the other option is basically to use state, right? Or we are going to do state. Now let's understand when to do or when what's the difference between using state and like what's the I would say what's the um like what's the advantage of using state versus prop. Now props are immutable, right? So props are, so the short, these are basically nothing but properties, right? So props are nothing but properties, and they are immutable. So suppose if you have some a state that only changes once, if you have something that will change one and will remain constant throughout, then we would suggest to use props, right? um However, if we like if we need something to change, right, or some changes are going to occur, then the best way to do is basically to use a state, right? So states will be basically mutable. So state is, so this is going to be my state, right? So state are mutable. Now a very good example will be, for example, if we are making a counter button, right? Suppose this is a button. Suppose we are designing a counter, right? This is a counter, and then here I'm going to keep a track of the number of times that I'm going to press the button. So now if this is immutable, then this kind of becomes a bit rigid, right? So immutable or using props here would be a very bad thing. uh, Using state here would be a very efficient way, because um, this is a because it is going to change, right? So after every press, this will be changed. So first it is 1, then it will become 2, then it will become 3, and so on, right? Now let's talk about data passing, right? So this is another important feature that we need to take care of, or that we should know what is going to happen with data passing. So okay, I guess it's this button. Yeah. Now okay, so now if you're using properties, so properties, okay, this has to be number 2, right? So the by default properties um, will pass data from parent to child. So this is how React data one-way binding is made, right? Now state will have its own local component, so it will handle data in its local component. Now usage wise, this is managed by the parent, right? So there is something called as pop drilling that we do, right? Parent managed, and third, this is going to be managed by component itself. So like where are we defining, or which component are we placing that um, property, we are going to manage it that way itself. Now there is one uh, okay, so let's see prop drilling, right? So we said prop drilling means, so drill machine is basically, so when you say about drilling, right, so suppose this is a wall, right? The job of that drill machine is basically to drill a hole inside the wall. On similar lines, if you say pop drilling, basically because of one way data binding, what we are going to do is uh, data will be passed from the parent, and then it will go down. This is child one done, and then this is, okay, let this just be, yeah, let this be child one dash. This is also, so basically this is what we are trying to say, right? Because of this prop drilling feature, data will, so prop drilling is basically passing data from the parent to their child and going inwards in the tree, right? Even if this does not make use of the data, we'll still have to do that prop drilling mechanism. So we'll be preferring to use, like, it's nothing more sort of, but then based on how we see, pop drilling is more efficient and a better way to do that. So we'll obviously try to refer. Sorry, state management is what we will be using much. Now let's see state management in React. Like, there are um, some some methods or some mechanism by which you can um, uh, use state, right? So let's see um, how to use that, and let's see like what are the best practices, and we'll go on from there. So if there is something, so in previously in old React, like uh, before the ES6 thing, React could be do the components could be created using create class, right? So we are not going to do that. We are going to do JSX because JSX is very good, right? And okay, now let's see a little bit about state, right? Also, we need to understand how we would be passing the data up the tree, right? Because once is only what do you say, by default it is going to happen only one way, right? That is how React has been made. So what if you want to do the exact opposite of how uh, data binding is going to happen? So let's see that. And then there is something called as component lifecycle as well. This is basically how components are going to get loaded, right? So there are different stages through which to go. Okay, we'll see that as well, but then first let's see this uh, first let's see a little bit of state management, and then we'll see. Okay, so the first way that we are going to do is using useState, right? So first is basically we are going to do is the first state management. Okay, the first is basically we are going to do use state. This is a very important, right? Now, how is what is this going to do is it is a very basic way to so what does it say? This is a very basic way to manage state. Uh, and then now best. Okay, so now the way. Okay, let's see a little bit in detail about use state. Now, use state is a React hook that lets you add and manage state inside functional components without the needing for class components, right? So instead of having class do it, we can just manage state inside functional. Now, the way it is written, or the way the syntax is basically something like state, and then you have okay, then we have set state, right? So now this is going to represent my current state value. So I'm going to have my current state value, and then set state is a function. So this is basically a function to update, a function to update my state. And then so then I'm going to do use state, and then here I'm going to pass my initial value, right? So whatever is the initial value, it will be passed in here. For example, if you're trying to click a button and then we are going to update a UI, right? So we need to have a counter, right, that is going to continuously update it, and then we need to have an initial value, right, the initial value of the state. Okay, so now these updates are going to happen asynchronously. These are not synchronous updates, so these are async updates which are going to happen here. And if we need the previous value, then we can use a function called as previous. So there is something called as previous count. So this gives us the uh, previous value, so we can get the previous value here. Okay, now there is something called as like, let's see one example. So for example, if you are going to have a counter, right, so first thing is basically these are going to be, we need to import it from React, right, into our own file. So what we are going to do is the moment we create a new component, we are going to add this. Now this is a new way of, instead of using require, so require was present in CommonJS, right? So now in ES6 we have this import statement that has been introduced. So we are going to use that, and then we are going to do from React. So this is going to be how our code is going to do. Now let's create a component, right? So a component will be so let's have a functional component. So we are going to do function, then we are going to have this counter, right? And then in our main index.js, we are just going to add this counter. So let's see, and now we are going to have our now see, there is one thing, right? We say that this is const, but then constant values are cannot be updated, right? So this constant is, now remember arrays are object, right? So we are referring to the, what do you say, we are not referring to the array because we are referring to the address of the array, or what do you say, we are referring to the basically it's the it's not the object, but it's the referral to the object. So we are referring to the reference to the object. So if the reference to the object is going to change, then you might run into a problem, right? So basically what we need to do is we need to have a button. So this is going to be okay. We need to have this is going to be my button, right? So this is my HTML button tag. This is my button tag, and then I'm going to add an event listener to it, right? So event listener, and then I need to, suppose this is okay, so let's have so this is count, right? This is saying count. Okay, let's go here. And now this is going to be my placeholder value, right? Which is going to come from my set count, or from where my so this is going to be the state kicking in. So basically the moment this, so I'm really listening to on click, right? The moment we click this button, this value has to change. So initially we'll be giving some value. So remember, this is going to be JavaScript code, right? So JavaScript code is always written in curly braces. So we need to be sure. Okay, so this is where my if you go here on no, let's yeah, if you go on top, yeah, this is this, right? We need to access this. So we can basically destructure it on the fly, right? And then only have, because as so now this is JavaScript thing, right? So what we are doing, if this is an array and we are saying this is count, and so we can directly refer to the anything stored here as count, right? So we can get that destructuring on the fly thing, and then just have so because this is JavaScript that is going to come in, so we are going to have, and inside that we are going to have this count. So remember, this set count is for updating. This is for updating the count, right? uh, Now this is not something that is rigid. You can have anything over here, but remember that this is responsible for updating. You can have anything, um, because React is going to track that, right? So if you don't use it, it's going to return another array, right? So you can name it array. I mean, so that additional set is basically to indicate that we are going to update. So it makes a little bit of logical sense when we are going to call the function, right? Yeah, so you can directly do that, destructuring. Instead of using the indexes, you can use the name itself. This is basically destructuring the array into two variables. So that is now JS part. This is not React. This is all JS. And then the next state we have is something called as useEffect. Now this is going to be it's very confusing at times, um, and it's very different. Let me check. So we need to be very cautious which we are using. Which these are basically called as hooks, right? So we say that these are React hooks, right? These are basically special functions in React that lets you use state lifecycle and other features in function. So we are, yeah, so components can be made two ways, right? So as we said, one we had class based and then we had function based, right? So our job is now to use function based rather than using class based components. um yeah, so these are basically going to, so props are something that is only going to be read only, right? uh we are not going to have any we cannot update it. That's the biggest part. uh, so if it's something that is just needs to be passed from the uh, parent to the child, you can use properties to pass that. Uh, so yeah, as we said, like, so these are two different things in which data can be managed. One is using props, another is using React hooks. Hooks are basically nothing but special functions that React provides us with. We can also have our own custom hook being defined. So only call hooks. So yeah, now there are rules of how we can call, right? So hooks are called only when they have to be called at the top level. We cannot call them inside loops. Conditions on nested only hooks from React functions, functional components. Only call hooks from React functions, like functional components. So we cannot use hooks in class based components. Now class components use this. So this dot, okay. Um okay, so now first, okay, uh okay. So state management is only for functional components. There are different ways to handle it. So if you're using a class based, it's there is a different way you can really have to handle it. And if it's a functional, then we are going to use hooks. Okay, so we okay. Let's let's clarify this thing as well. And before going to state management, right? So what we would say is state management can be done in both class. So components are basically two types, right? Because componentization is a very important feature. So components can be two ways. Either we could have class based, or either we could have a function based. Now in functions also you can have one more category is basically using arrow functions, right? So this is another way, another subcategorization, but then this is just how you write functions, right? It's not that difficult. Now if you go so if you're okay, now if you are in class based, if you're handling class based components, then there is a different way to use perform state management. So state management is performed differently. However, if it's a function based, this can be function or arrow function, right? So no, can be function or so here it can be. Now this function or arrow function, so when we are dealing with functional components, state management is often called as hooks, right? It's just how state management works in function components. So I mean that is how so we'll see that later on when we are studying with the different what do you say, different stages through which a component goes to. So yeah, we'll see that thing later on. uh, Now there is so if you're using functional components and you're using hooks, right? So hooks are um uh there is a what do you say, mechanism by which you can use hooks. So like let's see where, so there are rules for um using hooks, right? uh, so rules for now when we are saying hooks we are dealing with functional, right? So rules of okay, first is basically the rules is we can only call them at top level. They can only be present at top level. Like we cannot use them inside functions. We cannot use them inside loops, or we cannot use them inside nested. They have to be top level because this is how React is going to keep a track, right? So React has to keep a track. So now also we can only call React from a React function, like we already said that, but then we'll just write that down as well. So hooks can be only called inside of a called inside functional inside functional or arrow components, yeah. And they need to be top level. So first we saw was use state, right? Now use effect is for side effects, right? Now this is, so side effects can be defined in multiple ways. You can have multiple things to do that. So for example, now use state is only for data passing, like it does not perform any side effect as such. But then use effect is a hook that is defined basically to do what is a side effects, right? Like it's perform side effects in functional components. Now when we mean side effects is basically now there is a different what do you say, React hook life cycle, right? So we'll have to study the React hook life cycle, only then will we understand what do you mean by side effect and what do you mean by normal state management. Yeah, I guess that is all for this lecture. Hope you guys liked it. In the next we'll see about component life cycle and a little bit more, and then we will go on from that. That's all for this lecture. I'll see you guys in the next one. Till that time, take care. Bye bye.